The various spaces in both plays signify how private and public spaces are allocated and how it affects the overall events in the play. The tragedy of Miriam is defined as a closet drama. This was performed in the vicinity of a private audience in a household domestic affair. These spaces are tied with gendered assumptions which signified a marginalized area of less importance. This means Elizabeth Carey was neglected from the higher ranks of other popular playwrights despite her advanced education in contemporary drama and theatrical culture. This was taught by two of the leading poets in England at the time, Michael Drayton and John Davies, which further signifies her higher education. However, this is not to say that the play did not reach complete recognition or critical acclaim. As this play was most notably performed in aristocratic households, these were considered to be semi-public spaces at the time. These hosted an array of elitist high-class audiences who visited and enjoyed this play, meaning that it had reached popularity in this class. Thinking of the theme of female agency in the play, the tragedy of Miriam's antagonist Salome is the perfect symbol of female agency. She is the one who performs tumultuous actions. She divorces her husband in order to be with her lover, however she is eventually punished for it. Although she exerted executive power over her decisions, the tragic conclusion of the play further signified the higher patriarchal forces that were in place, such as the tyranny of the king that controlled the events and led to the fatal ending. Furthermore, Salome's otherness is also exemplifying this. Salome's presentation of being described as a blackamoor further exemplifies how limited she is using racial signifiers. Therefore, although she exerted executive power over her decisions, this meant that she still reached the fatal conclusion that Miriam was also subjected to. Nestler further defines the code of conduct that female characters and playwrights had to abide by in these gendered domestic spaces. Although they were private and isolated, there was still a public element where female behavior was analyzed and hyper-scrutinized. Nestler argues that it was encouraged how women should remain in their private spaces set aside for them. They could not fully remove themselves from public view and its social expectations. In the play, this tied isolated domestic affairs to a setting of full control over female behavior, actions, and therefore its consequences, which turned out to be of a tragic nature, ultimately controlled by patriarchal authority. Furthermore, this code of conduct severely affected the performance of the play. Closet drama's focus on text over spectacle made it an option for women's reading and writing to preserve and maintain their good name by being a resident in their own house and abstaining from appearing in public playhouses. This illusion of privacy continued as writers and printers presented closet texts as only intended for household reading by educated humanist and virtuous women. Therefore, these women were encouraged to participate directly with closet dramas because it often adapted biblical stories about chaste women, a stark contrast from the character of Salome. The Changeling was performed at the Phoenix, a performance venue that was previously adapted from what used to be a cockfighting arena. Therefore, this venue was claustrophobic and small, with a circular area kept for the stage as the audience space was wrapped around it. The small closet/discovery space on the stage is a space of tragedy where the audience transgresses temporal and spatial boundaries. This is where the characters' private affairs and secrets are kept, such as Beatrice Joanna losing her virginity to De Flores and their private affairs. Additionally, continuous stage directions in the manuscript hint at the audiences who waited between the play intervals as the candlelighters trimmed the candles. This presented itself as an opportunity for them to notice the setup for the next scene. Therefore, the discovery space on the performance stage held connotations of secrecy and separation, far from public view, which were eventually subverted and transgressed. In The Changeling, this discovery space is where various characters kept their secrets, as well as Alzheimer's experiments to test Beatrice's virginity, which she later finds. Therefore, this space is devoid of gendered assumptions. It's a space of gender ambiguity, which is reserved for both female affairs as well as male secrecy. The play also explores how the allocation of these private spaces and female and feminine secrecy is invaded and put on public display, which is also tied with domestic, gendered, isolated spaces. Kim Solga's reading explores how the architectural space in The Changeling portrays the stage to be a place where secrets and private affairs are found and invaded. The audience transgresses between these boundaries on stage and off stage. The offstage area is where the secrets are held and revealed to the audience, albeit ambiguously and left to wonder of the lack of narrative certainty. Kim Solga's reading calls on spectators to fill in the endless blanks vacated by theatrical image and narrative certainty. This meant that there were often narrative gaps that the audience themselves had to fill in. Translated into the manuscript, this left narrative gaps in the text. Furthermore, Solga argues how the stage is a place where these affairs were invaded. This shows the illegitimacy of the private domestic sphere, since within there was still an invasion and publication of information that was kept hidden and secret by the characters.
When considering, Nestler suggests that Grafina is a character who navigates patriarchal society through her simultaneous compliance with patriarchal order and resistance to it. I will apply this model to Miriam in Act 1, Scene 1, where this argument seems particularly applicable. In this passage, Miriam enters alone. This stage direction is significant in that Miriam is explicitly unsupervised on stage, yet she seems to direct her speech towards the audience when she fulfills the stereotypes perpetuated by an early modern patriarchal society. This simultaneous adherence to and rejection of masculine codes of authority provide an environment for Miriam to exert a female rejection of this power, while not to the extent of Grafina. The character, at least in this scene, seems able to exercise a, quote, narrative authority while avoiding scrutiny, end quote, at least to a limited extent. Furthermore, the play's potential for performance within an intimate household setting, in conjunction with Miriam's solitary presence on stage, perhaps alludes to the space being coded as one of female authority, despite Miriam's plea to be forgiven for her, quote, mistaking, end quote. Dowd's work also considers Act 4, Scene 2, in which Herod ends the, quote, temporary dominion over the domestic and political world, end quote. This scene is interesting because of the two characters' shifting power dynamic. Prior to Herod's entrance, it seems that Miriam used the onstage space as a medium over which to exert power, yet her shift to the offstage space seems, one could argue, equally powerful. Dowd considers the fact that Herod's desire to see Miriam fails to come to fruition here. In fact, Miriam does not enter this scene, but the subsequent one, Act 4, Scene 3. Perhaps in an early modern context, Miriam's appropriation of the performance space would have revived the social anxieties aforementioned. In this way, one could read Miriam's shift towards the imagined periphery space as one of powerlessness, yet her failure to comply to Herod's demands seems to manifest this intangible space as one where equal authority can be exerted. A work by Mark Hutchings entitled The Interval and Indoor Playmaking also exhibits some insightful readings into how performance space could be utilized, even when the space exists outside of the play's narrative. As well as providing an opportunity to trim the candles, the interval also provides an offstage space, not strikingly dissimilar to that of Carey's play. 2 points of interest for Hutchings are both the offstage abuse of Beatrice Joanna by de Flores, as well as the concealing of a rapier during the interval. Both of these examples require the audience's attention in order to be fully realized, and therefore use the temporal space as one which does not relieve or disconnect the audience from the plot. Moreover, the weight of de Flores' threats at the very end of the third act, which possibly would have been followed by an interval, provide a temporal and physical space in which de Flores abuses her off stage. Phrases such as, "In death and shame my partner shall be," in conjunction with "let this silence thee," convey a sense that his physical abuse of her is an inevitability which, perhaps, as Hutchings argues, the audience would assume to take place in the imaginary offstage space during the interval.